Fund. If you would please begin and state your name.
Hello. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Brian Purcell. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Programs at the Atmospheric Fund. And we are a public agency created by the City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario to address climate change solutions across the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, working in partnership with governments, businesses, and the community. First, I'd like to say that we acknowledge the need to accelerate new housing and applaud many of the positive measures in Bill 23, many of which the Toronto Region Board of Trade just spoke to, including measures to support intensification around transit stations. Concentrating development near transit and existing infrastructure improves affordability while reducing congestion and transportation emissions. We think the bill could go even further in this regard, and we support some of Environmental Defense's recommendations for minimizing costly and climate-damaging urban sprawl. But while we support the bill overall, we have one major concern with the bill. As drafted, it would remove municipal authorities for green development standards around the province. And we believe, based on our conversations to date, this is an unintended impact of the bill. I'm here to ask you for a single amendment, surgical, simple, straightforward, that would correct this oversight and preserve these long-standing green development standards. Green development standards are municipal design standards that address climate change, efficiency, and affordability in new buildings. They consolidate various municipal bylaws and design guidelines into a single cohesive document that clearly lays out design expectations for sustainable, efficient design. We helped the City of Toronto create the Toronto Green Standard over a decade ago in partnership with the development, architectural, and engineering communities. Since then, we've helped Toronto update and streamline its green development standard, and we've worked with large cities across the Greater Toronto area to introduce their own green standards, harmonized with Toronto's energy and carbon targets. They all use the same energy and carbon targets and metrics, with each city moving at its own pace, 1, 2, or 3 years behind Toronto in some cases, based on the local industry capability to build and to design to these green standards. In terms of carbon emissions, the Toronto Green Standard has been by far the most effective climate policy that the City of Toronto has adopted. It's also saved homeowners and building operators many millions of dollars on their utility bills through promoting energy efficiency and smart design. Going forward, green standards are critical to cities achieving their climate targets, and they also support the province in achieving its targets. They're also critical to protecting residents from ever-increasing energy prices and carbon prices. Green standards promote housing affordability because smart green design pays for itself, and it also saves money for cities on their infrastructure, which is ultimately paid for through development charges. So all of that supports affordability. It's also important to note that it costs about 5 times more to renovate buildings down the line to achieve these sustainability outcomes than it does to design them that way from the beginning when you have the chance to do it right. And developers who build to green standards can be eligible for financial incentives, or the purchasers of the homes, such as CMHC's Green Mortgage Insurance Rebate and Toronto's Development Charge Refund Program for those who build to the higher tiers of the Toronto Green Standard. Green standards have been adopted by large cities in Ontario because they are a practical way to manage growth. Toronto, Whitby, Ajax, Pickering, Brampton, Markham, Vaughan, Aurora, Ottawa have all updated or adopted green standards in recent years, all based on the same framework we developed with the City of Toronto in partnership with the development industry. And industry leaders like Tridel, Minto, Alice Don have all been key to developing the standards around the table with us and to building to the voluntary higher tiers and showing the industry what can be done in the future. Green development standards ensure this consistency and address real concerns around efficiency and affordability. Again, I'm asking for a single amendment to preserve them. Our amendment's straightforward, and you can see it in the package we've emailed and put in front of you today. It preserves the intent of the bill in that section and still streamlines planning approvals by removing red tape around character, scale, and aesthetic design issues with buildings, which we agree are not necessary as part of the site plan approval. Our amendment would cut that red tape, as you've intended, as the government has intended, while saving the green standards. And our amendment has been endorsed by over 500 individuals and 90 companies, and as you've just heard, it's also supported by the Toronto Region Board of Trade, which represents thousands of members across the region. To conclude, I'd like to tell you a story about how we came to have green standards in Toronto and subsequently around the region. It might surprise a lot of people to learn that the Toronto Green Standard is part of Mayor Rob Ford's legacy. May he rest in peace. I'd spent 2 years developing the standard, working with city staff and an advisory group of architects, engineers, and developers around the city. When the standard was finished and the reports were written, signed off on by City Planning and City Legal, senior city staff, though, decided to withhold it from council, thinking there was no chance Mayor Ford would support it. But they didn't bother to ask him. I was devastated because I'd worked so hard on it, and I'd recently celebrated the birth of my first child. And I'd been thinking the Green Standard just taken on a whole new meaning for me as I thought about the kind of world she would be inheriting. As I held her in my arms after that day, I was inspired to take action. I called up every city councillor I knew until I found one willing to walk it back onto the agenda. And then I briefed every councillor I could and asked the people who'd helped develop the standard, the experts and stakeholders, to write or speak to council and communicate their support. I sat in the council chambers and watched with bated breath as the standard was debated, and ultimately it was approved, unanimously, to my surprise. After the meeting, I thanked Deputy Mayor Doug Ford for his support. He was a councillor at the time, of course. I thanked him for his support for the bill, and he told me exactly why he'd voted for it. He said it's for the people who will live in those buildings. This standard will save them millions of dollars on their utility bills. And indeed, it has. Today, my daughter isn't a baby anymore. Like millions of kids around the world, she suffers from climate anxiety. The first time she came to me in tears, distraught about the state of the climate, I told her the story of how she'd inspired the Green Standard that almost died before it was born, even before taking her first steps. And I told her how it had grown and developed as she had and been replicated across the province. Today, Green Standards are on life support because of what I think was a mistake in the drafting of the bill.
30 seconds.
And I implore you not to pull the plug on this great legacy of green development standards that started in Toronto under Mayor Rob Ford and have expanded around the region. Please don't pass this bill without taking the time to fix this mistake. It can be simply adjusted through the amendment we've suggested, very minor amendment to correct this oversight. By all means, cut the red tape to accelerate housing, but save the green standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now invite the